I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
CJ, obviously you are an insider. You know a lot about a lot of players, a lot of GMs, a lot of management people. You're very in tune with what's going on in the National Hockey League. So I figure if I present this question to you, I might be able to get an answer. Why did Kyle Dubas change his Twitter profile picture to that of him with two phones?
Well, I think he likes to have fun. I think he likes to. He's more social media conscious than the average GM. Some of that is because he's been among the younger GMs. We're seeing a few other younger guys come in now. Kyle Davidson in Chicago, but he went to the Kermit T1 years ago. At one point, I think he just likes to have some fun, and he's very social media aware. And so, look, the probably on the surface reason is it's a busy freaking time. We're headed back to draft week. That picture was taken at the 2019 draft in Vancouver. Kind of became a bit of a hockey meme, or something that hockey Twitter got a kick out of back then. And I would suggest he and all his colleagues are spending a lot of time on the phone these days.
You wrote in one of your latest columns for North Star Bets the full story of who he was talking to on those phones. Can you share that story?
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny, right? Because I'd always wondered about it and, why it happened, right? Because in that moment, he wasn't actually trying to be funny. He wasn't looking to get that picture taken. But, basically, we're going to see this again because we're back in person for a draft at the Bell Center. Each team at their table has an old school landline, and it's a secure line where they can dial the other teams quickly and get their draft table. And so he was on the landline with another GM talking about a picks trade that never actually came to fruition. It was late in the draft. Sometimes late you switch your 6th rounder for an extra 6th rounder and stuff like that. And at the same time, a prospect the Leafs had drafted named Mike Koster. They drafted him in the 5th round. He wasn't at the draft in Vancouver. They tried to reach him and couldn't. Phone Kyle Dubas back on his cell phone. And so he didn't want to miss that call because he wanted to personally welcome him to the Leafs organization. So he picked up the cell phone, was still listening to the end of the landline call. And he said it was only a couple seconds, but the cameras caught him in that couple seconds. And therein lives the call. And so, yeah, it's a funny one. You can see how it happens. There's a lot going on at the draft because that kind of represents a draft. Let's step back. On one hand, all these teams are there picking prospects, and of course, you're welcoming kids to your organization. You want it. It's an exciting day for them. And on the other hand, a lot of GMs are doing business in terms of taking care of restricted free agents, setting the wheels in motion maybe for unrestricted free agent decisions, and then of course dealing with each other over trades. And so it makes this week so exciting. And I think that picture represents kind of what not just Kyle Dubas, but all the GMs are going through.
Every GM you'd think will be some sort of busy this week. And we'll talk about Kent Hughes a little later and some of the other moves that have happened in the last few days. But before we bring on David Bassel from Sports Interaction, how busy do you anticipate Kyle Dubas being through, now to the draft and then coming into the free agency period?
Well, I'd say incredibly busy because there's big decisions to be made. July 11th is a date where all players that are restricted free agents have to receive a qualifying offer or not. If a team doesn't tender a qualifying offer to one of its RFAs at that point, that player becomes a UFA on July 13th. And the Leafs have two interesting cases here. It requires sort of the nuance of the system to understand why this is. So I'll extrapolate a little bit, but Andre Kase and Pierre Engvall are two players obviously the Leafs like. Their qualifying offers are $1.25 million. That's not the problem. The Leafs would love to get them signed at those numbers. That would be great. But once they send a qualifying offer to the player, those two guys have the right to elect for salary arbitration. And where that could be problematic for the Leafs, and other teams fall into this with their RFAs too, is that they lose control of the process once that happens. Because if they were to go to an arbitrator, and there's no guarantee of that. Those arbitration hearings aren't until August, so there's still time to work out a deal. But if they go to an arbitrator and they give either Kasha or Engvall or both a contract the Leafs don't like, they're stuck with that contract unless it comes in over $4.5 million. And I would suggest to you for those players that won't come in over $4.5 million, but it might come in at $3 million and they don't want to pay them that, or it's going to be problematic to pay them that. And so in this week, the Leafs are trying to, I think, work out deals with those players to avoid having this come into play at all. Obviously they have this goaltending situation that's very much unclear. It seems that Jack Campbell's on his way to market. So the Leafs have to get at least one goalie, but they also have a decision on Peter Mrazek. Maybe they look at a buyout. We're also in the buyout window. And so they're managing that. They're rounding out their own goaltending department, if you want to call it that, after moving on from their goalie coach, Steve Grier. And, they have to be ready for free agency, which is a week from Wednesday, a week tomorrow. I mean, it's just a busy time. And they only have 3 draft picks. So that part, actually, they're one of the teams that, unless something changes, they make a bunch of trades and gain extra picks, which I don't expect to happen. They're not going to the draft stage too often to welcome players. But, there's a lot of moving parts. But I think we could go team by team and you're going to have similar dynamics. The key for the Leafs, of course, is they have to be very mindful of their cap space. And so all of these moves impact another. There's sort of a sliding doors aspect to this, or a trickle down effect with each contract handed out or each decision made. And so it's going to be a busy time. And, I'm not predicting major fireworks out of Toronto, but there's some big decisions still to be made for their team for next year.
You mentioned Jack Campbell. I mean, I know we still have a few more days before the free agent period opens, and maybe it's still hard to tell. I guess I'm still a bit surprised that there doesn't seem to be any resolution between those two sides in terms of a new deal. I guess it's looking as if it's more and more likely he's going to test the market. Am I wrong?
I would think so. Look, pretty much any UFA that isn't signed right now, a week out, I mean, you have to just wait a week and you can talk to every team. Like, I'm not saying they all won't sign. Someone like Patrice Bergeron, for example, isn't signed as we're recording this. I'm not saying he's necessarily going to test. Maybe one of Chris Letang or Evgeny Malkin resigns in Pittsburgh before this. But by and large, anyone who is currently a UFA, maybe the Denver guys too, because the Avalanche, of course, are still just working out their hangovers from that Cup win. So they've been throwing Lord Stanley around pretty good. But they haven't got down to business maybe on the same period as other teams that have had more time during their offseason. But by and large, any player currently unsigned, I would expect will at least peak at the market. Now, especially in the case of Jack Campbell, it doesn't 100% guarantee he's gone from Toronto. Remember, maybe he gets the market and nobody wants to pay him $5 or $5.5 or $6 million. I certainly don't think the Leafs are in a position to do that with the cap and with the money they already have, tied up in Peter Mrazek. And so there is a parallel. There is some alternate universe here, perhaps, where he looks at the market and still ends up back in Toronto. I think most likely that's not the way it goes. I think the Leafs will be looking for cheaper options. I think Jack Campbell's going to find his money. Honestly, I mean, there's only maybe 5 or 6 teams looking for what we would call, there's not really number 1, number 2 goalies anymore, but, a main starter, the guy that logs about 50 games for them or 45. But, between Edmonton, maybe Washington, maybe the Avalanche, for example, if they don't resign Darcy Kemper, New Jersey, I think that there'll be interest enough out there, and some of those teams have the cap space to pay him what he's seeking on the market. And so I think it just comes down to dollars and cents. It's not like a personality conflict. It's not as though the Leafs, I think they liked a lot of what Jack Campbell brought, frankly, but they were paying him a little bit less than $1.5 million last season to do it. And it's just going to be harder for them to pay him $5 million next year.
On the subject of dollars and cents, it's time to bring on David Bastow from Sports Interaction. As always, if you're playing Sports Interaction 19 plus, we ask that you play responsibly. And there is a link to responsible gaming strategies in the description of this show. Welcome to You Can Bet That with David Bastow. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. With the draft coming up in the next few days, DB, I know we kind of talked about it a little bit last week. Any major changes on some of the odds when it comes to who could go number 1 or number 2 or even number 3 in this draft?
Oh, you know what, Julian, great question. It's still Shane Wright all the way right now, even though there is some pretty good debate going on in the hockey industry right now. And I guess at Sports Interaction, we've added a whole ton of props for it. So now we have individual breakdowns of every single team and odds on where certain players will go throughout the first round. Also over and under on the top 15 to 20 players on where they'll land. So if you're talking about Luca Del Bel-Beluz out of Mississauga, I think that number is around 20 something. So does he go under that selection or over? You don't have to pick the team. You just got to pick, okay, what part of the first round or beyond is he going to go? So it's a lot of fun. It makes Thursday that more interesting, even though Thursday is already pretty cool as it is. And, dreams come true on Thursday night for these kids, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Friday night too. Exactly.
The whole weekend, right? I mean, it's a pretty cool event. It's nice to see that it's in an awesome city that is really going to welcome this, and ironically, the city that's going to pick first overall. So there should be some optimism in Montreal on Thursday night.
Okay. I want to ask about Nazem Kadri, who is obviously going to, it could be possibly test the market if he doesn't re-sign with Colorado.
Yeah.
Some very interesting odds from Sports Interaction. The Seattle Kraken at plus 350. It feels as if the Seattle Kraken are linked to all of these different free agents. DB, can you explain the reasoning why the Kraken are the favorites here?
Well, I'm guessing, and I think CJ is going to answer this best for all of us, but I guess when you link the Kraken to a lot of these free agents, it's because they have the money to do it. You kind of look at this, CJ, and you go, okay, well, Boston, they have some money to spend. Seattle, I just don't know if Kadri's going to sit there and go, I want to go to the Seattle Kraken, because it just doesn't present the same opportunity he had in Denver last year. But I could be wrong about this. You never know if they build up pretty fast. But CJ, any gut feeling on where Kadri will go? Because obviously he's a top catch as far as this crew is concerned, coming up on the 13th of July.
Absolutely. I think he'd still like to remain an Avalanche if all things were equal, but they don't have as much money to spend. I mean, they have cap space, but they have some other players between Darcy Kemper, Val Nichushkin, Andre Burakovsky. They got a number of free agents, so they have decisions to make. I look at other teams like maybe Detroit. Yep. Maybe they can lure him back close to his hometown of London. I think if Nazem leaves Denver, you're going to see him sign a long-term deal somewhere, probably even maybe a maximum term 7-year deal with another team. So his thought process wouldn't be, does this team give me a chance to win next season? But, it's more about the length of that contract, where the organization's headed. And what about Calgary too? We'll see what happens with the Johnny Gaudreau situation, but there could be some moving parts there. If Gaudreau moves on, look out for them in the weeds. We know they tried to trade for him a couple years ago, and wouldn't surprise me if they jumped in. But yeah, you got to look for the teams with some cap space, because it's Nazem Kadri's turn to get paid. And so Seattle, Detroit, Boston, Calgary, and there's a few others probably fit the bill as possibilities.
Yeah.
I like that. It's time for him to get paid. David Bastel, thank you so much for kicking it with us on You Can Bet That. Don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. Again, sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, fellas.
Now, our next partner is a pretty cool product. Let's talk about Athletic Greens. If you're looking to get better gut health, more energy, or a stronger immune system in a really easy, natural way, you've got to check out Athletic Greens. I'm sure you'll all agree that most of us are not huge fans of having to take a bunch of pills or vitamins in the morning, but with Athletic Greens, you can get rid of all those extra vitamin bottles and finally make some room in your cabinet. Athletic Greens is an all-in-one solution that actually tastes good. You'll really enjoy actually getting your daily vitamins in through them. What is this stuff actually? With one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and even aging. All of the things. Like that's pretty cool. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, daily free, or gluten free, and contains less than 1 gram of sugar. No GMOs, no nasty chemicals, or artificial anything, while still tasting good. It will cost you less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. So you don't have to go out to the store, go to Starbucks all the time. Invest in some Athletic Greens. It has over 7,000 5-star reviews, recommended by professional athletes and trusted by leading health experts such as Tim Ferriss and Michael Gervais. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/Johnston. athleticgreens.com/Johnston to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. With the NHL entry draft taking place on Thursday in La Belle Province in Montreal, a lot of attention on the Montreal Canadiens, who have the number 1 overall pick. And Kent Hughes spoke to the media earlier this week. Could be taking Shane Wright, could be taking Uri Slafkovsky, mentioned a third, so it's likely maybe Logan Cooley's getting a look. At the end of the day, I still think they take Shane Wright, but I'm wondering if you have any intel on that, or if you feel as confused as everyone else might be feeling.
Well, if you're confused, that means Kent Hughes is doing his job, right? I mean, yes. It really does not benefit the Canadiens in a draft where it isn't consensus to have their plans be fully known days before the draft. Because they're in trade discussions. I think we're seeing less consensus on this draft maybe than any that I can remember the years I've been around the league, Julian. I think there's a number of reasons for that. Hard enough to pick what 18-year-old kid is going to be a star at 24 as it is for the most part when you're drafting teenagers. But you're picking 18-year-olds who've just lived through a 2-year pandemic and had various different developmental challenges in terms of access to ice time, playing time, what have you. And so I think that it would be reasonable to assume some of these prospects maybe aren't as far along in their development as would typically be the case if we had what we might call a normal 2 years. So this draft has more dartboard throws all around. And so I think you're going to see more top picks potentially moved in the first round as a result of that, because there isn't that consensus. It's not as locked down as normal. And so if you're the one controlling that first domino, it does not benefit you at all to have it be known your plans. I think it's reasonable given where the organization's been at. Feels like the Canadiens are forever looking for a center. And Shane Wright fits that bill. But, it seems that New Jersey, who's behind them selecting, is interested in Uri Slafkovsky. Maybe there's a way to make a trade. I mean, look, I think the deception is admirable, and I can't tell you who they're going to pick. I think sort of the logic and the circumstances here make me inclined to believe it's Shane Wright, but I don't think the Canadiens will be telling very many people, even in their own organization, that decision will be kept pretty tight. And it makes it a little bit more dramatic as we get towards Thursday, because we're recording this on a rare Tuesday show. We're only 48 hours from, give or take, from when that pick's going to be made. And I like that we don't know about it. I think that creates a little bit of drama heading to the Bell Center.
Absolutely. Also, I don't know if this is a bold prediction or not, but I'm also intrigued at their 26th pick, only because I have this weird feeling the Canadiens are going to trade up. I don't know if they're going to do it up into the top 3 and try to see if they can snatch both Wright and Slafkovsky, but I think it's a little bit more realistic for them to kind of take that pick and maybe add a player and go up into the 15s or whatever like that. Like that's not, maybe it's not a bold prediction, but I could totally see the Canadiens trade up that second first round pick.
Well, they have interest in it, and they also have a couple players that are, have their names out there in trade discussions. Josh Anderson probably most notable among them. And so when you add that all together, they have some ammo probably to get another first round pick, depending on how those deals might shake out. And look, they're hosting the draft. They're coming off an unexpected 32nd place finish. That was not in the plan. Believe it or not, a year ago at this time, they were still in the Stanley Cup final against Tampa. I believe that series ended July 7th, and we're recording this on a July 5th. So 12 months ago, the Canadiens were in the Stanley Cup final. They're going to go up and pick first overall a year later. And, I don't think they want to stay at the bottom too long. And that was sort of an unplanned fall to the bottom. And, I think that they'll be pretty aggressive and not turning this into a full rebuild, but there's still some chips to fall here for, I think Kent Hughes taking over this organization, putting his own fingerprints on it, and, maybe trading out a veteran or two. And then, obviously now trying to usher more new prospects into the organization that can help him down the road.
If memory serves, July 5th was game 4 of that Stanley Cup final. So that's when Josh Anderson, funny enough, scored that overtime winner to extend the series before we had game 5 in Tampa, where they ultimately won. Had Tampa lost that game of the series, had gone back to game 6, CJ and I would have met for the very first time in person at the Bell Center.
Wow. This is our sliding doors moment. But, fortunately, we've met a few times since. We're in a good spot. And this July 7th, I will be in the environment with you. So we'll get it a year later.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's actually really wild. A year later. That is pretty wild. Anyway, the Canadiens obviously creating a lot of intrigue. I want to move on to another item, which is developing as we're recording, and it's entirely possible it might be finalized by the time this episode is out. But we could be on the verge of NHL history with Mike Grier being linked to the San Jose Sharks GM job. If he gets it, he'd be the first Black GM in the National Hockey League. What do you know so far about that Mike Grier story? Does it look like it's happening? And what else can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you he will be their new GM. The Sharks are going to formally announce that after we're recording this, but on Tuesday. And, it's a huge moment for their organization, for Mike, look, I do see a league, and look, we line up to point out the many flawed things that happen, but I do see a league that's moving in a positive direction with more inclusionary hiring practices, including more people in these decisions. We saw Emily Angelnatsky become a video coach with the Washington Capitals. She's going to be the first full-time female member of an NHL coaching staff. I know there have been multiple women that have interviewed for jobs in the American Hockey League for coaching roles recently. We've seen a few women, join front offices. Now you have Mike Grier, the first Black man ever to run an NHL team. And so this has all happened in the span of 12 months. If you go back to Emily Castonguay, Cami Granado's hirings in Vancouver. It's a huge moment, and, it's a big step too for Mike Grier. I mean, he's been an assistant coach in the league, obviously had a long career, played for the Sharks. It's a big leap into that spot, but lots have done it before. We've seen a lot of former players become successful GMs. Even Doug Wilson, the man he's replacing, who spent so long in San Jose, had a ton of success there. There wasn't much of a gap between his playing career when he became the GM of the Sharks, and that was proved to be a great move for that organization. He brought them a lot of great years and narrow misses, frankly, of becoming a cup team. And now it's going to fall to Mike Grier's hands to try to get the Sharks back to that position of prominence in the NHL.
It's one thing to see a Black man be linked to an NHL GM job and ultimately get it. We're not too far off from when we were talking about Kevin Weeks being connected with that GM job as well. So the idea that, I don't know when Mike Grier got involved in the process for the San Jose Sharks organization, but that is wild that at least 2 prominent Black faces in the National Hockey League through their playing careers and everything else they've done after being linked to a GM job. I've never seen that before. And we're still at this point where we have to go through a lot of firsts, but big up to Mike Grier for him getting that opportunity in San Jose. That is exciting news.
It is. And look, on that note, and this counts for women, people of color, people we haven't traditionally seen in these jobs, they needed opportunities like anybody to, down the line, right? In Emily Angelnatsky's case, she was the Hershey Bears video coach. When it came time for them to need a new video coach at the NHL level, they looked to their AHL person and said, she's doing a great job, come join the coaching staff. This is how this happens. And I think that's where the positive development happens. The more people you see join the AHL, whether it's women or people of color or get, junior jobs in NHL front offices, it's just natural. Everybody has to climb a similar ladder. You have to gain experience somewhere. And so, we'll celebrate the first at the NHL level, and we should rightly celebrate this hiring of Mike Grier. But, let's hope we continue to see more and more people getting opportunities lower down to build up their resumes and put themselves in a position for future jobs that open down the line. I think it's only natural. It's all tied together. What worked in Mike Grier's favor in the Sharks search, and they did a very expansive search. I think they were all along open to someone who is sort of a first time in this position. They weren't necessarily looking for, an experienced hand. And they talked to a lot of former players, guys like Scott Mellenby went pretty late into the mix on this job. Ray Whitney went down the road in terms of being interviewed a couple times by the Sharks. I think Scott Nickel, who's been working for the Nashville Predators, was involved. And, there's other names too. But what all those four guys that I just mentioned share in common is they had long NHL careers. And so, the Sharks were looking for someone with that particular bit of experience and, bring back someone they know in Mike Grier, who played time in the organization, has been around the NHL a long time, and, going to be pretty cool to see what he can do with that team, because he's got some big decisions, man. He's got some heavy contracts. Whoever took this job, I would have said the same thing, of course, but he's got a team going in the wrong direction. He's got players on the wrong age of 30, and he's got a lot of guys making like 8, 9, 10, 11, $12 million, depending who we're talking about, that he's going to have to figure out how to navigate that and ultimately get the Sharks back to beat a competitor. And he's also got to hire a coach too, because remember, they've just fired Bob Bugner and the entire coaching staff here in the last few days. So there's a lot of work to be done. We'll celebrate Mike Grier on Tuesday, and then he's going to be 2 phones to his ear for the rest of the next few weeks, I would imagine.
I was about to ask, considering the timing of this hiring, how long until he gets on a flight to Montreal to be at the draft?
Well, he was already going to be there, so that's handy.
That's helpful.
I don't know if the press conference they're doing is in San Jose or not on Tuesday. If it is, he's flying across the country, I would guess, not too long after that press conference wraps up, because, they've had Joe Will has been there. He's been their interim GM. He was their intern GM at the trade deadline. He's made decisions for the organization, and they would have gone through their scouting process. It's not like Mike Grier comes in and he's going to have probably a ton of influence on their first round pick. Let's be real about this. If he's taking over the job Tuesday, I don't think he's having strong opinions on who they're drafting Thursday. But certainly by next week with free agency, that's where you're going to expect to see him enact his plan. And he might be trading someone away. He might be buying somebody out. I mean, those are decisions that he's going to have to reach in pretty short order here.
All right. Let's move on to the Winnipeg Jets, who hired Rick Bowness as their head coach. He was previously in Dallas. We know he helped them to the Stanley Cup final in 2020. Now he takes over in Winnipeg, where they had Paul Maurice, and then Dave Lowry succeeded him after that. Yeah, to Dave Lowry, who succeeded him after that. And now they find themselves with a brand new coach, Rick Bowness. What do you think of his hiring?
They say you can't go home again. I'm old enough to remember Rick Bowness as a Jets 1.0 coach. I saw some pretty funny videos going around from his time, just a baby Rick Bowness behind the bench back in the old days. But, it's funny. Rick did an interview, I think a day or two before he was officially hired by the Jets last week, and he said he was 95% retired. So, that's a bit reflective of what went on here, right? It's no secret the Jets were, rolling out the red carpet, trying to get Barry Trotz to come there. And I think they had to pivot when that didn't happen. And a key part of this hiring is that Rick Bowness is the head coach, but they're bringing in Scott Arniel as an associate coach. And I think, given Rick's age and experience level, it's a shorter term solution. Maybe at some point we're seeing him hand the reins off to Scott Arniel, but certainly I think those guys are going to work in tandem at the top of the coaching staff to try to fix the Jets, if that's the best way to put it. I mean, this is an organization, wasn't that long ago. I mean, long enough, 5-6 years ago, they're in a conference final, but we sort of thought they were going to have a more prolonged run of success with that core, and it hasn't happened. I think you're going to see the possibility of a change or two to that core. I mean, Blake Wheeler, the Jets are working to maybe find a place for him to be traded. They have a big decision looming on Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's not long away from unrestricted free agency and seems unwilling to sign a long-term contract. And so, maybe it's him that's dealt. I noted that at Rick Bowness's welcome press conference, that he said he's spoken with Mark Scheifele, and that, Scheifele seemed energized and excited by the opportunity because, we heard some rumblings early in the offseason about his name, even a little bit last summer, but perhaps he's, going to, find a rejuvenated role within the team, under Bowness. But, it's a pretty veteran group. And I think that it makes sense to want a veteran hand there because they got a lot of good players, Julian. Like that's the one thing I look at the Jets. They didn't defend well for a number of years. Rick Bowness's teams typically defend well. But they still have Kyle Connor and Nikolai Ehlers and Connor Hellebuck as, a top tier goaltender in the NHL. Like they got players, man. And so I think it's a big job for the coach because it definitely went sideways, once Paul Maurice stepped down midway through last year. But, I can see the logic in bringing in a veteran specific to this case. And that's why Barry Trotz held a lot of appeal early in the process. And ultimately Rick Bowness is the one who got the job.
Yeah, you've got it right there with some of the players that they have in that core. I've always thought that the Jets, especially up at forward, and we can even mention guys like Josh Morrissey at the back as well, they have pieces to at least be going on decent runs year in, year out in the postseason. They just haven't done it as frequently as I thought they would. I'm at least for Jets fans' sake, it'd be nice if Rick Bowness would be that guy to kind of lift them up into more of a legitimate contender in the Western Conference.
Well, and look, he has known for a softer touch with players, right? He's a bit of a player's coach. I think it's fair to call him. And maybe some of these guys, like it tends, you go back and forth. Usually it's a disciplinarian goes for a run with a team, and then you go to maybe someone who's more of a softer coach. I think and I don't use soft in a negative terms here, but I just mean someone who's maybe more positive, accentuates the positives rather than harping on the mistakes. I look at John Cooper in Tampa. I think that's exactly what he is. I think he's a motivator ultimately, and I think he's got a real good sense of people and which buttons to push, but doesn't necessarily do it with the stick. He does it with like a little bit of dangles a little carrot in front of you rather than hitting you with the stick. So I think that's what Bowness will bring too, and it wouldn't surprise me at all to see the Jets bounce back next year. I mean, we got to see their offseason. I'm not making any firm predictions until I know what who gets traded and how it all shakes out. But to me, they're not a team. Like, for them to make the playoffs next year should be the goal. Like, that should be the expectation. I think it's very much possible. They've clearly got to change some systemic ways in which they play. They've just been drowning in shot share for years. It feels like they just have never been able to figure out that issue. I think that's something Bowness should be able to help with if they make life easier on Hellebuck, and he is the Connor Hellebuck when we've seen him at his best. I mean, that right there is going to make them a formidable team. And then they've got weapons up front that can beat you on their power play, that can make individual plays. And, ultimately, I think we should be talking about a team that's on the rise again after this brief dip.
All right, let's move on to Filip Forsberg. I know there's a lot of guys who could be free agents this summer, but this file with Filip Forsberg in Nashville, this one seems to intrigue me the most right now. He hasn't re-signed yet. I wonder what that means for his future with the franchise and beyond.
Well, it's very much in peril now. I think that's fair to say. You get this close to the end, emotion comes into it on some level. There's a lot of emotion here. He loves Nashville, and as far as I can tell, they've loved him. But, this is a business decision, and sometimes when you mix business and pleasure, when you put emotion into a business decision, sometimes things go sideways, right? And I think that's at least a possibility here, that they get to the end and they don't reach a deal and he has to go somewhere else. I mean, look, that's the outcome. I think this is different than some other players where I'm saying they got to peek at the market and they might come back. I think if he gets to market, it's too late in his case. It reminds me a little bit of Daniel Alfredsson years ago. Like, no one ever really imagined him leaving Ottawa. I don't even think Daniel Alfredsson imagined himself leaving Ottawa until it got to the last few days and they didn't sort of step up and pay him what he thought he was worth at that time. And, then once you mentally make the decision, you're looking somewhere else. When you are so ingrained in one team, one organization, one way of doing things, I think it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. And so that's what's at play here with Forsberg. And look, there's a lot of great things about playing in Nashville. It's a tax-friendly state, one of a handful in the league. It's got a great fan base. I mean, you don't have to sell Filip Forsberg on how great the lifestyle is there, and I think how much he loves the team. But, they're also an organization that they haven't typically awarded signing bonuses to some of their top players. I know Roman Josi was an exception. They certainly have not given up very many no-trade clauses ever. Josi, again, their captain, got one in his last deal. And so those things become sticking points as much as money, too. The way the money's paid out and some of the things around the deal, like the no-trade clause. And so, I almost feel like it makes too much sense that these sides stay together. Like, it feels like you have a couple that's in love. Why are you breaking up? But, there's some, you put money on the table. It's a big decision. It's a big time in Forsberg's career. I think ultimately with them being able to give him an 8-year deal too, we shouldn't discount that. Like, if Nashville goes to 8 years and $8.5 million, for example, that's what they said they're doing or not. That's a $68 million contract. if he was to get that over 7 years, which is the most he could get on the market from someone else, he's got to get close to $10 million a year, 9 and change, to make the same money. And then there is tax considerations. So even if you look at it that way, is he getting $10 million on a 7-year deal somewhere else? Maybe. He's coming off a hell of a season, 42 goals, 84 points, I believe. His best year production-wise as an NHL player. But I think that it makes too much sense that ultimately they'll reach a deal, but every day that passes, they don't have that deal, Julian. I start to go, wow, this guy might be joining a free agent class, like truly joining it, that includes Gaudreau and Kadri and Malkin and Letang and Klingberg and Evander Kane. Like there's a lot of difference makers at the top end of this free agent class that, maybe I never thought we'd get here with Forsberg, but it seems like it's at least a possibility.
There's a reason why you ranked him as high as you did on your big board, Siege.
He'll be higher. I'm refreshing the big board coming out of draft weekend, and if he's not signed by early next week, he'll be even higher.
Okay, all right. Something we'll keep in mind for the next time we have to talk about the big board. Well, there's one last story I want to get to before we get to Ask CJ, and it's a very interesting one surrounding a Russian goaltender by the name of Ivan Fedotov, who signed with the Philadelphia Flyers last week, but was later detained for evading military service. It doesn't look as if he might be joining the Flyers organization anytime soon. There's a lot of weird details with this story. What do you know about this particular story that's broken down the last few days?
Unfortunately, I don't have a lot to add other than it's a very concerning situation. You wonder about the fallout for other players and their safety and their ability to come to North America that are in Russia. And like just on a human level, this is awful. I mean, it sounds like the guy's detained against his will, potentially poisoned, or that at least there's some suggestion from his lawyer that he wasn't feeling well, was hospitalized. Now they're sending him to some remote location to serve military service. Your heart goes out to him and you just wonder, I don't have any hot takes and I don't have unfortunately, any private information or more to shed light on the story. I think the Flyers and the NHL are still trying to get their minds around what's going on too. I mean, and this is happening a world away at a time where there still is a war going on. And, I think any player that went back to Russia, there's some concern about their ability to get the proper documentation to fly back, to rejoin their teams. We're going to see it. This is hardly a bold prediction, but Thursday and Friday at the draft, I think we're going to see very few Russians drafted, and teams will be reluctant, just not knowing. There's an uncertainty attached to when they might be able to get those players. And so this is an unfortunate time in the world. And Fedotov just signed his NHL deal with Philadelphia, right? He was a free agent a couple months ago when he signed that contract, and hope for him and his family that he's safe and that that this doesn't go on too long for him.
That's well said. We can move on to Ask CJ. We managed to get a handful of questions from you watching at home or listening wherever you are listening to this podcast. I want to start off with this one from Florida man Matt Maroon. What are Julian and CJ's favorite movies of all time?
Oh, I haven't watched a movie in a couple of years.
And what do you mean in a couple of years?
I mean, like it's been years since I watched a movie, like sat down and watched the whole movie.
Do you remember what the last one was?
No, it's so long I don't remember it.
Oh God. I watched Top Gun Maverick, I want to say 2-3 weeks ago. You ever watch the original one?
Oh, I watched the original. Are you kidding?
Okay. You got to watch Top Gun Maverick. You've definitely watched the original. Watch the new one. Trust me, you're going to love it. It's amazing. I have not had that much fun at a movie theater in a long time.
All right. I'll take your advice on that. Cause it's not like I don't hate movies. I guess it's just, who sits down and does anything for 2 straight hours anymore? Like doesn't happen.
we watch hockey games.
Okay. Yeah. That's an exception. That's the only thing I do for 2+ hours. And I do a lot of that, which goes hand in hand with the movie thing. So my favorite all-time movies have largely been sports movies. Like I loved Tin Cup back in the day. I was a big Mighty Ducks guy as a kid. I don't know if it would stand the test of time. I certainly haven't watched that in many, many years, but those movies were big on my rotation as a kid. But yeah, I'm not good on pop culture, man. Like I just listen to my Taylor Swift and That's about as close as I get to being hip these days.
The Dark Knight is probably near the top of my list of favorite movies. Brilliant Christopher Nolan flick, obviously. I liked Black Klansman, which Spike Lee did a couple of years ago. It actually follows an undercover cop who works in Colorado who manages to infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan. It actually was based off a memoir written by a guy who actually did it. Brilliant movie. Really enjoyed it. I feel like there's more, but like every time I get put on the spot for these things, like I always get stumped. Like there's always like a movie I like forget, but like those are two that definitely Get Out with Jordan Peele. Big fan of that movie. Big fan of Jordan Peele. You probably never watched Mad TV when you were younger.
No,
Mad TV, basically like an alternate version of SNL. Jordan Peele got to start from there, and now he's turned himself into one of the best horror filmmakers living today. And I don't even like horror like that. So
questions like this make us seem like we're 100 years apart. Like it's like we grew up in like just like different universes, which is hilarious because like we're gonna have a beer in Montreal this week and everything will feel normal. But like anything like this, like it's like I don't know what you're talking about and you don't know what I'm talking about. Because I'm thinking like an old. I thought of one that I used to love as Fight Club. But like, I
love Fight Club.
Okay, I was thinking there's no way you at the time you could have watched that because you'd be a little kid, and you know it was. But it's a great movie. It was ahead of its time. I think Chuck Palahniuk wrote the book. But I love that movie. In fact, like I'm inclined now. If I go, I'm gonna watch Top Gun Maverick, and I actually might rewatch Fight Club because it's probably been 15 years since I watched it.
Fight Club, definitely. That Pulp Fiction. Quentin Tarantino. I know there's some issues with some particular words he likes to add in some of his scripts, but like Pulp Fiction is one of the best movies I think he's done. Django Unchained, I think, was also a really good movie. So there's some other movies popping into my head, but Fight Club is definitely in there. Even though
you remember the first rule of Fight Club?
Yes, and I'm not going to, we already kind of broke that rule, sort of. Anyway, next one from Addy RH705. Do the Flames offer Matthew Tkachuk the captaincy to entice him to stay in Calgary if Johnny Gaudreau ends up leaving?
Possibly. I don't have any direct knowledge on that, but why not? I think they've already been pretty aggressive with Gaudreau. It sounds like they've put a pretty sizable offer on the table. Obviously, much like the Forsberg situation I discussed earlier, they can give him 8 years, which when you're talking about the kind of money he's getting, that 8th year is life-changing money in itself. If he ends up signing for something like $9.5 or $10 million, that's an extra $9.5 or $10 million. It's going to be hard to get from another team. If Gaudreau leaves, I think that signing Tkachuk is already a huge important decision as it is. But you try to add. You go with a full court press. Anything in the positive, like if you're Tampa, you trump your sales tax. If you're Calgary, you trump great way of life, close to the mountains, and here's the captaincy, bud. So I would have no problem if they did that, and I would think that is at least a possibility. There's a couple big moving parts in Calgary. I think that I was asked on a radio hit I just did, Julian, recently, which Canadian GM is going to be the most likely to have two phones to his ear this week. I think Brad Treliving is the one to keep an eye on. There's just so many different things that might happen, and if he loses Gaudreau, which is a possibility, then he's got a fair bit of cap space to maybe enter the free agent market for somebody else too. And so that's where, you wonder, would he pivot and go to Kadri? I think that there's a lot of, it could be a spicy week in Calgary.
Oh, two phones. First, we're talking about with Kyle Dubas, and we get to near the end of the podcast, and Brad Treliving might be doing the two phones thing. This next one from Jay Why Not. Hey, CJ, I know the NHL is always looking for ways to draw interest. Is there a scenario you could see similar to All-Star Weekend with them having some sort of alumni versus current players of each team skills comp friendly game? Any thoughts? Have fun in Montreal.
It's not a bad idea. I know they've involved the alumni a little bit more in some of the big events. I actually went to a game in August 2019 in Finland that they do. I was over there on a work trip, and they have the current day NHL stars versus like the old stars, and it's a big charity event that seems to be huge there. I mean, I can't see why you couldn't apply something like that here. I don't know how competitive it is, but it's kind of cool if you grew up loving a player and then see him on the same ice as Patrick Laine. Like Timo Solanne against Patrick Laine in a game is kind of interesting. I think you're going to see more from the alumni, though. A lot has happened there since Glenn Healy took over that organization. A lot of positive, and they're looking for ways to make money for former players because they want to fund programs to help those that need it. And getting them front and center with the current NHL stars is a great way to do it.
Last one from Boyd_1212. After the Ryan McDonagh trade, which we didn't even get to that much on the podcast, but this is, I guess, our way to get into it. After the Ryan McDonagh trade, potentially re-signing Filip Forsberg, which we also went into on today's episode, are you hearing anything on the Preds' next move, given David Poile has said he is willing to spend to the cap?
Well, I think really we have to be looking at what happens if they don't sign Filip Forsberg. Then they're in the market for some of the scoring help that's there. They got a pretty strong blue line adding McDonagh. That contract might not age great, but I'm willing to bet it's going to be pretty positive for them, next season. Julian Brisebois wouldn't have traded Ryan McDonagh, as he said, if it wasn't a hard cap league, but he had to make a difficult decision because he's worried about, keeping some younger players on his roster. I think you'll see Nashville be pretty aggressive, but I don't think we can say, they traded for McDonagh and they signed Forsberg. Well, if they do that, there's not a lot of cap space to go around. But if they don't end up committing $8 or $8.5 million to Forsberg, they're going to probably spend it somewhere else. And I think you're going to see them chase goal scoring help because all of a sudden they've lost a 40-goal scorer from the lineup. And, fortunately, if that is the way it plays out, there's a few options out there for them. There's guys that can put the puck in the net in this free agent class.
All right. Thank you, everyone who chimed in with the question for Ask CJ. And that's going to do it for the CJ Show on this Tuesday. Thank you for accommodating me with the date switch because an upset stomach kept me from doing it on our regular Monday. But Thursday, we'll be together in person with our pre-draft show. I'm looking forward to that, as always, with every time we've been together in the same building, Siege. I'm
coming to Montreal literally in an hour. So I'm coming in hot to your city. Glad you're feeling better, and look forward to linking up with all the SDP crew down there. It's going to be big presence for us around draft.
Yeah, man. And looking forward to meeting everyone on Friday for the Fan Appreciation Night. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Big thanks to Jesse Blake for producing today's show. And we'll be back on Thursday with a brand spanking new episode. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long and peace. Enjoy the NHL draft and everything else that comes with it before, during, and after.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JKMcKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.